I found the answer. I like to pray.
I was born in the 50s. There were 8 children in our family. I'm next to the oldest. I grew up in a small community known as Lincoln Beach, and no, there wasn't a beach there, but it was a small knit community where there had to be maybe 50 families, and each family had a lot of kids in it. Whenever we would go outside to play, because my parents told me that if you ever come in the house, you're staying in the house. So we would go outside and play, and we would play from dusk till dawn. We had to make our own fun. We would go out and we would play hide and go seek, release the Belgian, and almost every day we had a softball game going. And I was always the last one to get picked because I couldn't hit the ball. We were all poor. We didn't know we were poor. I think I was maybe about 9 years old before we even got running water in our house. We had a pump outside. We had to bring water in and boil it on the stove, and we took baths in a galvanized tub. We didn't have inside bathroom facilities. We had to use an outhouse. And so even though things were tough and everybody out there were a few people that had facilities, but for the most part we all grew up the same way. We ate together. It didn't matter about the color of our skin. We slept at each other's houses. Different parents chastised everybody else, other kids, but it was great. There were blacks, whites. That's the way we grew up. We didn't know any different. The schools were also integrated. Everybody grew up knowing everybody. Everybody grew up caring for each other. Everybody grew up looking out for each other's backs. That's something that's part of my childhood that I'll always remember. And that's the way that I've lived my life from here forward, because that's all I knew. That's all we knew when we were kids. There were things as far as racism. I'd have to say that whenever I was in school, that might have been the time whenever we experienced racism. There were kids in our school that were not kind. For whatever reason, I don't know whether it was because of the color of our skin or what, but we were treated differently. Yes, I have experienced that, and it's not a good feeling. My mom was pretty much a stay-at-home mom, of course, with 8 children that she had to raise. My dad was a coal miner. He worked in the coal mines for probably 25 years. Even though my parents didn't take us to church, we lived right down the road from the church that we went to, she always made sure that we were in Sunday school. I think that's one of the reasons why I have such a love for Sunday school. And she always taught us to do what was right. Even after I grew up and I was maybe a teenager, and whenever I would be asked, I would ask my mom, you know, Mom, can I go out with my friends? What time do I have to be home? My mother never told me what time to come home. The only thing she would say to me was, use your own judgment. And there might have been times where I thought about doing something that I know that I shouldn't be doing, and those words always rang in my mind that my mom trusts me. I'll never do anything to go against that trust. And I taught my kids that, to use their own judgment. I was 9 years old, and there was a lady by the name of Virginia Blair. We all called her Sister Blair. She had a sister named Miss Evans, and she had a little choir that we all belonged to. And she took us from church to church and singing in that choir. I can remember exactly the day whenever I got saved. They had a little camp meeting every year around the beach, and they had on the floors, they had sawdust on the floors. And I can remember so well in my mind. And I was around there like by myself. I don't know where all the other kids were, and it was in the evening. I was about 9 years old, and they were singing this song by Billy Graham, Just As I Am. And I remember I went forth and I gave my life to Christ. And I went home and told my brother Joe about it. I didn't tell my parents. And I went home and I said, guess what? I got saved, you know. And from that time on, you know, Christ has been with me. And it's been a great time. Now, I didn't always remain that way, but I went astray like a lot of people have. But he always had his reins on me, pulling me back. until I ultimately, at about the age of 28, just totally surrendered my life to the Lord. Dr. King was killed back in 1968. At the time, that's the year that I graduated, and it was devastating. It was devastating because he was someone that we all had to look up to, someone who cared about not only us, but everybody. It didn't matter what the color of your skin was. You know, he fought for what was right. And I think that whenever he died, a lot was just stripped from us because he was like someone that we knew was standing in the gap for us. But I do remember that he was a great man and he was fighting for equality for all of us. After I had grown up and, you know, had my family, I had an opportunity to go to graduate from Bible school. And I went to a 4-year Bible school. I graduated, and after that, I taught Genesis for 3 years. And it really gave me a better understanding of God's Word. But mainly, I think that in the learning of the things that I learned, I gained a greater love of not just the entire Bible, but of the Old Testament. The Lord led me in a direction that took me into something totally different than I ever realized I would get into. I worked at a government facility for 33.5 years before I retired in 2008, and it was wonderful. But then I was led in a total different direction than I never ever expected to go in, and that was in missions. I was able to go to Oaxaca, Mexico. Back in 1992 was when I went on my very first mission trip. And I went back there for a second time. And then a few years after that, I was able to go to Kenya, East Africa, which was an awesome experience to be able to walk in Nairobi on the streets. And while we were there, one particular occasion that I can remember was the children that were there. The parents would send them out on the street, and they would send them out on the street where they looked like they didn't have any shoes on, and they were begging. And that's how a lot of the families made their money, by sending their children out on the street to beg. And then the last trip that I went on was to Zimbabwe, Africa. When you go there, it's like you're going back home. That's the feeling that I got. Some of the conditions that we had to face while we were there, we didn't have. Sometimes we had to sleep maybe on the floor of the church on little thin mats. Sometimes there weren't, because we actually went out in the bush. We didn't go to cities and have big conferences and things. Nothing was wrong with that. But we actually went out to areas where the people lived in remote places where there were no bathroom facilities. And I was thinking to myself, well, you know what? Maybe by the way that I grew up, God was preparing me for something that He knew was going to happen in my future. So I guess that's one of the reasons why that I know that God does cause all things to work together for our good. And He knows what's going to happen in everything that happens in our life. And He prepares us sometimes even from childhood. So maybe that's what He was doing. Maybe He was preparing me for something that He knew was going to happen in the future whenever I would end up going to Africa. And I had to live through certain conditions that ordinarily some people might think were, oh, I can't do that. But it was no big deal for me because I had been there already. I had done those things already. If I had to leave something behind to the young people, it would be, first of all, seek the Lord. If you have the Lord in your life, you absolutely cannot go wrong. Not to say that you might not go through some difficult times, because we all do. That's life. But if you have the Lord in your life, there is no way that you will go down a pathway that you shouldn't go down. And if you have God in your life, you have love. And you will treat your fellow man, you'll treat people around you the way you want to be treated. Everybody's not going to be kind to you, but you have to show them, you have to love them. You might not like the things that they do or what they say, but if you have God in your life, you got to show them love.